good evening, and welcome to the Neighborhood Passion Affinity Network, presented by Google and Neighbor to Neighbor. Tonight, we're going to be focused on creating community and honoring diversity, which is sponsored by HCA Healthcare and TriStar Health. My name's Jim Hawk, and will be your host this evening. Tonight, we're going to focus on one of the 8 key neighborhood passions, creating community and honoring diversity. Our topic is supporting our Asian neighbors. Our Asian American, and Pacific Islander neighbors need our support. With the recent rise of anti-Asian rhetoric and unprovoked attacks nationwide, it's important to reiterate that racism has no place in our neighborhoods. And so tonight, we're going to be discussing racism. It relates to this community and how we as neighbors can help them. And I want to say from the start, we have 2 amazing people here tonight to help us explore this conversation. Joseph Gutierrez, who's with API Middle Tennessee, and Pratik Dash, who's with TIRRC in Tennessee Immigrants and Refugees Coalition here tonight as well. But let's make this clear from the very beginning. Just like all white people aren't the same, all Asian people are not the same, right? And so we're going to be talking, I guess, in generalities tonight, but let's realize that we have even within the Asian American community, we have quite diverse peoples. And so neither Joseph nor Pratik are speaking for all Asians, Pacific Islanders. They're not. But they and their organizations have experience working with folk, and they have some experiences that they can share with us that help us understand some of the things that this community is going through. And so we're really glad to have them here tonight. As I mentioned before, Joseph is with API Middle Tennessee. Pratik is with TIRRC. I'd like to start out tonight, because I think it's most helpful, by asking them just sort of to introduce themselves and tell us about their own Nashville, Middle Tennessee experience.
Yeah, I can jump in first. Joseph Gutierrez. My last name is maybe a little bit misleading because I think people miss out a little bit of this colonial history sometimes, but both my parents are from the Philippines, and the Philippines was a Spanish colony for 350 years. So it's just the Gutierrez last name is a Spanish last name, but I do identify as an Asian male, and I'm Filipino American. So I think it's just an important note, and that's kind of what my story is. Both my parents immigrated to America in the 80s, and I grew up in Los Angeles, California. So I think one of the things about what's different between the West Coast or the different coasts and then being Asian here in the South is that, the Asian population is a lot more dense and ubiquitous on the coasts. So, I never really challenged sort of what does my Filipino American identity really mean to me? And what does it mean to be an Asian American? And then I ended up moving to South Korea to teach English. And, very quickly, it forced me to challenge that really quickly because I was like, I'm not this kind of Asian. And, it's very different living here. And I had that sort of experience of living as an expatriate, thinking about what it meant to be an immigrant and really thinking about that. And then ultimately I met my wife over there, and she's from Murfreesboro. So that's what brought me here to Nashville. And I moved to Nashville 8 years ago now. So I've been in Nashville since then. And then very immediately thinking, just recognizing the South is a very different place. And if in Korea, I thought, maybe I'm not this kind of Asian. When I got back here, I thought maybe I'm not this kind of American. So I think, it was a difficult place to just really reconcile who I was, what did I mean to the city? And then, so probably about 4 years ago, my wife and I bought a house after I finished grad school. We decided, we're going to live here and we're going to commit to the city. So then, part of that was thinking, again, who am I here? What do I need to do to live here? And, this is why we started API Middle Tennessee. So my wife and I just, we got to start building community. And I think, I went around over the course of a summer, just meeting with people, finding Asian Pacific Islanders just to talk to, hear from, listen to their perspectives. And then eventually evolved into just like we started meeting regularly, and then we formed a nonprofit organization. So, and then here we are, we're still continuing to build community, lift API voices, and unpack API identities. And that's our mission. And we're really trying to carve out space for us and for our people and our community to feel welcome here in Middle Tennessee.
Thanks, Joseph. Pratik?
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. I always have Joseph and I do know each other, and Joseph always goes first. And then I realize how much more eloquent he is than me. And I always I'm like, oh man, I should have gone first, but that's okay. So I think for me, I have lived the majority of my life. Sorry, it's my dog in the background. I've lived the majority of my life in, I kind of moved to Franklin, Tennessee when I was in 3rd grade. And as we all know, Franklin's a little bit different than Nashville. And so went through the Franklin Special School District kind of system. And when I was in 8th grade was when 9/11 happened. And I was 15 years old. I remember that I was very excited to give to a cause. My school was collecting money for the victims of 9/11, and my mom gave me $20, which when you're 14, like you're 14 or 15, you're rich, right? And I went to go give that money to my school. And I remember I took that $20 bill, and it was during lunch, and I went to a volunteer parent and I reached out my hand to give that money to her. And she took my hand and she pushed it back and she said, "Sweetie, we don't take money from terrorists." And I think that was my first sort of real experience with overt racism, and the first time that I truly felt different and knew I was different and everyone else around me, I felt like I was a different person. Through that experience, I ended up writing an op-ed to the paper and really like wanting to make a difference there. And I was really proud of myself for doing that. And my career trajectory was still sort of the same as many Asian families of, doctor, lawyer, engineer, that's what you're going to be. And so I went the engineering route, one of the 3 paths. And I ended up getting an engineering degree. And after that, my grandfather in India got very sick. So I flew to India to take care of him. And similar to Joseph, like I thought, I'm super Indian, I know the language, like whatever. And I stepped off the plane and I realized like, I am not as Indian as I thought I was, right? And I used to lean into that part of my identity. And I suddenly realized that like, it's a different world altogether. I was supposed to stay there for 6 months. I lived there for 5 years. And when I came back, again, similar to Joseph's story, my wife was interning with TIRRC, the organization that I'm working with, and she invited me to a TIRRC event. And I didn't care about immigrant rights. I didn't care about any of that stuff. I just wanted to make out with the girl at the end of session. But I walked into that event and it changed my whole world. And now I work to organize a lot of different types of communities, Asian and Pacific Islander communities, Muslim communities, and all kinds of communities outside of the Latinx community. The Latinx community is organized by my coworkers, and I do a lot of work with civic engagement. So registering people to vote, getting them to go to the polls, explaining why it's so important to vote. That's sort of my role, and I have not looked back at that engineering degree, and it has been the best decision of my life.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, this past year has been, I think, difficult for all of us. It's been hard. There's a lot of, with the pandemic, with the craziness that's going on in government, we've certainly have had a rough year, but it has been especially hard for the Asian Pacific Islander community. You all have been bore the brunt. Again, we talk about you not being monolithic, but the community has been treated like a monolithic community in the way that it's presented when we talk about COVID-19, and certainly the violence spills out everywhere. I'd love to hear, if you would, a little bit about how what has happened in the last year has impacted your community and people within that community.
Yeah, so one of the things I think, to report on at a national level is that, the reporting of hate incidents has, for Asian American and Pacific Islanders, has grown exponentially across the country. And for Tennessee, it's no different. And, I think part of the issues here is sometimes that, not everybody would necessarily recognize a hate incident as something hateful. So like, there's language like the China virus, Wuhan flu, Kung flu, like people don't necessarily recognize those as racially motivated hate slurs, but they are. So I think that's one of the issues that like the community really faces. Some other things that just kind of know, particularly in the restaurant industry, I think that's very relevant for immigrant communities and sort of forming neighborhoods and forming, like cultural enclaves and like small communities that kind of grow, is that Asian Pacific Islander restaurants not only had to deal with the pandemic, but they also had to deal with people avoiding Asian Pacific Islander restaurants just in general. Just because of association of a public health issue. So I think, there was a dual issue for like small businesses that they're already facing. And those are the lifelines of small immigrant communities here. So this is an important thing to acknowledge.
Yeah, and I work with a lot of refugee communities. Tennessee and Nashville in particular has a very high Burmese refugee population, has a very large, or I guess a significant Vietnamese population, and many of these communities, are, we have parents that have told us that they're scared to send their children to school. We've had people that are afraid to go to their church because they feel unsafe. And I think that, we've heard from these communities about the fear, and, I think they're reaching out to ask, like, how do we overcome it? And I think many of them have asked, like, how do we keep our churches safe? How do we keep our our children safe in schools, which are things that they never had to think about before. And so kind of seeing them navigate through that and trying to figure out what those resources are has been, to be frank, really, really hard for us as organizers to deal with as well. But it's sad that it's a necessity, but that's how our communities that's what they're having to deal with.
Yeah, and I think the Atlanta shootings really bring this point kind of really home, and sort of just thinking about, the issue of safety. Because, I think even like my parents had this sort of mentality that if you just keep your head down, work hard, things will be okay. But, I think that's what the Atlanta shootings brought to the fore. You had to question that, right? Like this idea that, just keeping your head down and working hard is no longer enough. So we're at a moment in time where, our community needs to stand together and then also stand in solidarity with other movements happening in the city. But, it's just an important and crucial time, I think, for, just the trajectory of how our community is supposed to interact with the rest of the city.
And I'll add one more point, Joseph, Joseph already touched on it, but like Joseph said, right, there isn't a huge Asian population and a safety net like there is in California or on the coasts, right? In Tennessee, our communities are very isolated. I like to think about, when we do sort of kind of a power mapping exercise, right? The way it works is that there's a pocket of like 20 or 30 families that live together in Murfreesboro. And then there's maybe a pocket of 5 or 10 families that live in Pulaski, and then another pocket or so of folks that live together. And so even those like statewide connections that you see in other communities, you don't see as much in the immigrant communities and in the API communities in Tennessee. So they lean on their own families and their own networks the most. And so when that is 20 families strong, the first thing that comes to mind isn't, we should have a march, we should have a rally, and we should, that's not the first thing that comes to mind, as opposed to what we see in the New Yorks or the Californias or things like that. And so it's really, something that is again, just contributing a little bit to the fear in this moment, that there are times where the communities do feel isolated. And I think Joseph has done incredible work to help those communities realize that they're not, that there are other people around them. But like Joseph said, we can't, you know, we have to show these communities that it's not just Asian communities standing up for one another, that it's all Tennesseans standing up for one another, it's all Nashvillians standing up for one another. Like that is very critical next steps that we need to make. Sorry, Jim, I'm jumping ahead to what we need to do for solutions. So
that's okay. Lead on. Yeah, because that is a great segue. Then let's talk about that a little bit. You know, we like to encourage people to be good neighbors. So, what does it mean to be a good neighbor to our Asian community? How can we working in, you know, Bellshire, Antioch, Eastwood, East Nashville, how can we be good neighbors here? What can we do?
I'll start, Joseph, and just jump in whenever. I think first and foremost, like I think that there's a true shift of demographics in Nashville and in Tennessee, right? Like we are becoming more brown and Black every day. There's 100 people a day that move in. We all hear about it. We all feel the traffic. We know that's a real thing. But I think that there's a tendency for communities to integrate and remain with folks that look like them, that have the same sort of culture as them. And I think that the first step is to kind of break out of that comfort zone and to like go find a event, go find a community member, and you know, figure out a way to learn more about them. And I think one thing that I would always recommend is food is one of the best ways to connect with someone. You don't have to speak their language. You don't have to do anything like that. Just go try their food. And if you don't like it, you don't like it, but you've learned about it. It's a way that you're supporting an immigrant-owned business or that you're trying something new and you're getting to kind of exchange cultures and really helping communities feel welcome in that moment as well. So I really recommend anything that has to do with food and trying new types of food to truly, that it's really fun to get adventurous in that way. I think the other thing of thinking about it is art or music, things like that. That's a very easy way to kind of expose yourself to a new culture without having to like cannonball into the pool, right? It's just dipping your foot in the water. And so maybe just kind of YouTube a little bit about music and learning more about culture or something like that. Put one API song or Asian and Pacific Islander song on your Spotify playlist. Like it can't hurt, you know? And so those are sort of ones that quickly come to mind for me. And then I'll pass to Joseph since I am rambling like crazy.
No, I actually think one of the best ways to be a neighbor is to just go out and try food, to share meals. Because, you know, I think so oftentimes like across Asian cultures that, you know, food is love, right? Like, you know, we're not so far from a history where, you know, like my grandparents were struggling to put food on the table, facing issues of like nutrition issues just like in their childhood. So I think that's a very important way to think about it. I'm dropping a link in our chat. We're building out an Asian Pacific Islander owned business directory. So if you need help finding a restaurant, you can look at that website and we'll be right there. Because I actually do think it's a good way to support small businesses. You know, if you wanted to learn more, there's not many like cultural sites you can think of, but that like might jump off the head. Like there's no museum here or anything like that. But you know where to stop is actually faith-based institutions. So really thinking, I'm trying to stop like, what would it mean to just go down to Murfreesboro and stop by Wat Lao Buddhist Temple or stop by the temple there on Old Hickory? So it's like just really thinking about, you know, if you wanted to learn more, faith-based institutions are cultural assets, and really thinking about, you know, where do you just want to learn more and see people, members of the community? That's where I would get started. So yeah, I think those are good things to being a neighbor. Yeah, we're just really recognizing, you know, that we're also a very diverse group. So just, you know, just recognizing, you know, Asia is not a single identity. So just thinking about, you know, I don't know, like just recognize both Pratik and I would fall under the same like demographic right there in the word Asian. but like our parents speak entirely different languages and come from entirely different cultures that have no intersection. So just really thinking about that in some ways.
Yeah, I'll also add another two other kind of cool events, which I'm not as prepared as Joseph to put in the chat, but Jim, what I'll do is I'll email them to you so that way we can push it out. But one that I would really recommend is the Wat Lao Temple in Murfreesboro that Joseph was talking about. That's a Buddhist temple where many of the Laotian community goes to. They do a food festival every year. It's been closed down because of the pandemic, but they basically bring it's booths of different API community members who are API owned businesses, and you get to sample their food and try some food. It's like $10 and just like all you can eat. So like it is definitely worth it. And so I would really recommend hitting that up, and I'll make sure we get a flyer over to Jim. The other thing is that TIRRC is hosting we're hosting a night market on August 28th, where TIRRC is the Tennessee Immigrant Refugee Rights Coalition. We just opened our new building out in Antioch, but we are going to be hosting a night market with 10 to 12 different immigrant-owned restaurants. And you can buy a ticket, try some food, kind of get to see the building and check out, meet folks from all different types of cultures, both API, Middle Eastern, Latino, everyone. And so yeah, just flagging that as another awesome way to get involved as well. And I'll make sure that you all get a flyer very soon.
Excuse me, can I jump in right quick?
Well, you've already jumped, so go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry that I can't do it better, but my computer is in a really awkward place. But here's my singing bowl. I'll put this down here. But anyway, I read a lot. I always have. And I used to teach ethnic and minority groups when I was teaching in Bowling Green, Ohio. And I started reading novels from written by people from different countries. And it was one of the best ways to get to know a non-academic version of people's cultures. So when you read Japanese or Indian, various Indian or from the Philippines, the novels that the people have written about their real life experiences, it brought to life to me so much the commonality of how we are as human beings, that I really began to relate to my students better when I was able to have a better picture of what home life is like. Because a textbook can only give you so much. And when you look at, for instance, a National Geographic magazine, you see photographs that were taken at the best of the best. But when you read a novel that grips you the same way, when I read about The Eyes Were Watching God, for instance, when I read like The Red Tent and novels like that, it just opened my eyes tremendously. So I wanted to share that with you, that literature was another really great tool to have access to the culture and the reality of people from different cultures.
One of the challenges that we have at Neighbor to Neighbor is that we work with, last year we worked with over 117 different neighborhood organizations across the metropolitan area. I can count on my hands, my two hands, the number of Asian Pacific Islanders who are part of those groups. And most of them, if they are part of them because they belong to an HOA, and as part of their contract, they have to be part of that group. That's a challenge. Our neighborhood organizations in the city are either all white, all black, or all black and white, with very few people who are non-white, non-black. And it's not that our neighborhoods are that way. In preparing this week for this class, I'm doing a lot of walking. And in the last month or two, it really has amazed me the number of Asian people living in my neighborhood. I live in East Nashville, historic Edgefield, and I perceive that to be almost all white these days. It has gentrified. but that's not the way it is. There's a man that immigrated from the Philippines 3 blocks away. I met a fella from India who moved here from California, and walking the other day. And if we open our eyes and really are open, I think we can see that we really are more diverse than what we sometimes think we are. And there is a sense of a hiddenness or quietness. I think when I hear you talk about that you're not going to be there, having marches or that, I think that resonates with me, that's not really the Asian community here in Nashville. It's a more quiet community, but maybe it's just quiet to those who don't know it.
Yeah, I can kind of touch on this a little bit. I mean, I'll give you a good example of my family, right? My grandfather is still in India, and my grandfather was a part of Mahatma Gandhi's movement. He saw when they were fighting against the British for Indian independence, and so he saw that, right? And he understood it and was a part of it. But my parents, when they came to this country, my parents were born before, or they were born after Mahatma Gandhi's movement. And then they moved to the United States after Martin Luther King had done all the civil rights work. So like the Muslim ban, for example, was like, or even like Black Lives Matter, that was the first time they ever saw any sort of like real protest before, kind of in their lives. And so like my parents' generation, and that is the majority of the generation that has immigrated to this country, is they've never seen anything like this before, right? This is all brand new to them. And so I think that that's sort of like an interesting piece, because like whenever I'm leading protests or anything like that, like my grandfather is texting me and he's like, this is amazing, keep it up, right? And my parents are like, stay home, don't mess with it, right? And so there's like a very interesting intergenerational gap there. So I think that's one piece that's important. I think the other piece is that we've seen other communities like I'll give you a good example of my parents, when we went through 9/11 and I was dealing with a lot of bullying and things like that myself, my parents also owned a business in Lewisburg, Tennessee. And so they also like dealt with vandalism, things like that. And they treated that as sort of an immigration tax. Like they were like, this is part of the sacrifice that we made to come to this country. And so they aren't really more quiet, but in their minds, they are like, there's also sort of a narrative that has been perpetuated for their generation to kind of keep them down, that they're outsiders, right? I don't feel like an outsider because I was born here. So ain't nobody gonna tell me I'm an outsider. But for them, they felt isolated in that time. There was a narrative going on around that time that they are outsiders, and it's kind of gotten into their minds that that's true. And slowly but surely, as they've stayed longer and longer and longer in this country, they've been able to push that away. And so now it's not as much as prevalent. But for newer communities that are around here that haven't gotten an opportunity to build community, that haven't gotten an opportunity to do that, and then you move into a state where many representatives are using anti-immigrant rhetoric, are using, are calling them outsiders for political gain, right? Like that is not going to be, I don't fault them for being quote unquote quiet, right? Like, and so I think that that's sort of the situation that we're seeing. And Joseph, you might be able to shed a little more light on that situation.
Yeah, and it's tough because I think standing out and speaking up isn't necessarily not just part of the culture, but oftentimes immigrant communities have left their home country because to do so would put them in danger. So right, like really thinking about like civil disobedience and political unrest oftentimes meant death. So just really thinking about what it means in some ways. And that's why part of API Middle Tennessee's mission is lifting people's voices, because I think people also don't recognize like the modes of engagement and how to stand up for themselves or speak their story and speak their truth. So I think that's one of the issues that like our organization is really trying to face by just lifting each other's voices and recognizing that there is power if we're together. So it's just important that we're here.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I will add, like I said, like I do a lot of work in when it comes to registering people to vote and voting. And people, you know, when I go into communities like, you know, if I go into a Black church, right? And I'm registering them to vote for them, registering to vote is filling out the form, they're done, and they're gonna go vote, right? For an immigrant community member, it's coming to this country, applying for a green card, then applying for citizenship. Then after applying for citizenship, then finally getting that oath sworn in, and then filling out your voter registration form. Oh yeah, not only that, you are now going to go to this like weird machine that you've never seen before and like put your paper in, and that law and those laws change every single year, right? Like it's such a much longer process for immigrant communities that people sometimes forget about. A lot of people think citizenship is like Amazon Prime. Like, why don't you get citizenship? 2-day shipping. It's not like that. You don't get 2-day shipping with citizenship. It's a very long process. And so being able to talk about voting and citizenship to these communities, like Joseph said, many of them were told if they vote in their home countries that it's, you know, there's a corrupt system, that government is a problem, and they might die. So then trying to talk to them about civic engagement here, there's some real fear there. And so really one of the most uplifting parts of my work is seeing a first-time voter feel that sense of empowerment and being really proud to vote for the first time, regardless of the result in the end. The fact that their voice was heard and their voice was uplifted in an electoral way is always incredible to watch. And then another one is many of our communities, you know, many API community members also may not have voting power, or might even be undocumented, may not have immigration status in this country, but we find ways to help them plug into electoral work. Maybe they're knocking on doors, maybe they're making calls, and they're saying that I can't vote, but I need you to vote so that our state, our city, our country can be more welcoming and inclusive for our communities. And that sense of empowerment is so, so critical. And centering their voices is also very, very critical in these moments. So I think one other piece, I know I'm going all over the place, Jim, thanks for being patient with me. This is the other piece that I'll add is that, you know, in these moments, it's so critical to really center and uplift Asian voices, similar to what you all have done here today, and to really take a moment to listen about what is best for API community. So I want to just commend everyone who's on the call, and Jim and Valerie for convening us as well. So actually done with my thought. There it is.
I want to make sure we give Helen and Carolyn and Jeff a moment to share, or anything that they're thinking, or any questions that they might have.
Well, I have to say, I'm on a different spectrum because I lived in Yokosuka, Japan for 3.5 years. I fell in love with every Asian culture there was. I have, like I said, I have so many dolls. It doesn't look, my house does not look Black. It looks Asian and Hawaii, because I picked up, you take your shoes off, and their food, the presentation of the food in Yokosuka was beautiful. I ate sushi. I never had sushi before in my life. And I ate sushi, and I just love Yokosuka, Japan. And the other thing I love about the Asian culture, you guys are very quiet, very quiet. They used to hate the Americans to get on the train because they were so loud, and they were so neat and polite and quiet. And the children went to school on a rope. I have to tell you this example because I got so many good stories about Yokosuka, Japan. My husband and I were driving, of course, on the left side of the road. The little kid raised his hand, meant for my husband to stop. But my husband was like, "Hey." I said, no, you gotta stop. They walked to school at 3, 4 years old by themselves. I went to the fertility festival. I'm pretty sure you guys know about that. The fertility festival? No? Yes? Did y'all know about the fertility festival, guys? Come on now. I went to that for the first time. I was just so like devastated, excited, but I was like, And then I went to the temples. So I have a different spectrum about the Asian culture. I loved it. And they taught me so much, but of course I'm not quiet like they are. But I just love it. And any kind, since you're in Antioch and I'm in Antioch, maybe we can get together. I'll let you see some of my dolls. I have a warrior. I mean, I have so many dolls. My family goes, "What are you doing?" I said, I fell in love with it because the other thing, I went to the Gomi store. I know you're familiar with it. I got everything here from the Gomi store. And one of my dolls that I showed you guys was $600 at the Navy Exchange. But at the Gomi store, I got it for $3.50 in yen. So I love the culture. I love everything about it. And that's my different spectrum because I'm open to so many different things. And the only thing I know how to speak is, I may be saying it wrong, Ohio Gosamasu. That's the only thing I remember from the language when I went over there. So yes, I love your culture and I'm glad I got to experience it. And that's all for me.
Yeah, Japanese history is kind of interesting here in Middle Tennessee just because of like industry. So you might want to check out the Japan American Society of Tennessee for any of those culture exchanges. And they put on a Sakura festival every year as well. So that'd be one place to check out. But yeah, just thinking about, like Bridgestone and Nissan, we kind of just gloss over the fact that those are both Japanese companies. So just really thinking about, what does Asian industry mean here for the region as well?
Carolyn, Pratik put the Facebook page in there for you to go find out about. So make sure you take a look at that.
Well, there was a lot that I learned from about their culture tonight. And sushi, I love it. I eat it at least twice a week. I love it. So, Joseph, I'm so glad to know that you're not that far from me. We're just right around the corner. And when I was campaigning with my council person, we actually knocked on several doors over in that area. So you're not that far from me.
Yeah, I go to church with Jennifer Gamble.
Oh, really? I love her. We work close together on a lot of things over in this area.
I do some city council work too, Helen. Give me some love. Come on now.
Okay, yes. We all need to meet up.
That's all right. That's all right. I'm close to Carolyn. Carolyn and I be our team. That's all right. That's how it is.
Well,
I know that Joseph put in about the directory, but while we're talking, if you all would put in your URLs for your organization, that would be most helpful for everybody to get a chance to go to those groups. Anybody else have comments or questions or something they'd like to say at this point?
Oh, there was a quick question on like demographics for the Asian community here, and I just want to touch on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so across the state, we're sitting for Asian and Pacific Islander, it's close to 4% in terms of the overall population. Within that category, the kind of largest groups represented are Indian and Chinese, and then trailing behind that are like Vietnamese, Filipino, and a few others. And then the Pacific Islander population is actually very small, split between Guam and Samoa mostly. And then Native Hawaiians don't necessarily get tracked there very well, like in terms of like the American Communities Survey and the census. So that's just one of the other things that kind of gets lost. But that's kind of how it is. I want to say also too that the demographic covers like the full gamut of socioeconomic backgrounds as well. So when you're thinking about Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders here in Tennessee, you're looking at immigrants and refugees or families that are really facing poverty, but then you're also seeing like a lot of white collar professionals and overrepresented in some fields as well, particularly in like healthcare, as one of the fields that like particularly Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are overrepresented. But yeah, there's just full diverse backgrounds, ethnicities, and cultures to really be represented here.
Yeah, and I'll also add that there's a wide range of immigration statuses for those communities too. So we talked about refugees, communities, things like that. What many people don't know is that Indian communities, my community, is one of the highest undocumented populations in Tennessee. So there are many undocumented Indians in this state, and people don't recognize that or know that. But when people talk about immigration issues or DACA, when you hear that in the news, the immediate stereotype is thinking, oh, Latinx, community member, it's someone from Mexico, whatever. It's not true. It affects many API communities too. There's many Korean community members and Indian community members that are dealing with, the lack of comprehensive immigration reform on a federal level as well. So really wanting to name that as well.
Okay, folks, I didn't hear any other comments. Pratik, Joseph, thank you so much for being here tonight, helping us to understand a little bit more about what's going on in a community, or I should say in communities, right? In communities that are very important to the future of our community here in Nashville, to our city. And for everyone, when we talk about the importance of neighborhoods, we talk about how important they are to our health, our well-being. The healthier the neighborhood, the greater the potential for all of us to succeed. And part of that is for us to realize that great neighborhoods don't happen by accident. And it takes all of us being intentional to make that happen. And especially for this group here, one of the ways that we can make great neighborhoods is by really focusing on creating community and honoring the diversity within those communities. So as you're moving about your community in the coming weeks and months, be on the lookout. Look for folk that maybe you don't really recognize as being part of your neighborhood, and yet they're there. And reach out, and a kind word, a smile, a wave, food sharing, all of those are great ways. We're not looking to develop neighborhood organizers and activists. We're looking to develop relationships with people, relationships with our neighbors, and build on that. And so that's what I encourage you all to do in the coming weeks. Next week, we're going to be talking about conservatorship. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people in our neighborhoods who are older adults these days, and they are living alone without family anywhere nearby. And some things happen to them, and suddenly they're no longer able to function either physically or mentally. And you as a neighbor may see that. And what can you do in that situation? And so we're going to talk about conservatorship and how that works. So again, Pratik, Joseph, thank you for being here tonight. Thanks to Google and HCA TriStar Health for being here. And most importantly, thanks to all of you who came and are watching this important video. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Thursday night at 6:15 p.m. Bye, everybody.